Last week at the Fordham University in New York City took place an important event titled Genocide Prevention, Upholding United Nations Human Rights Declaration. The event was organized by Trauma Outreach and Prevention Meaningful World under the leadership of Dr. Ani Kalajian. The event opened with introductory remarks by event's moderator Andrew Doliner and Melissa Gazal, Associate Director for Students Involvement at Fordham. Dr. Kalajian welcomed everyone and asked for a moment of silence and meditation for the victims of genocide and atrocities around the world. The first speaker of the event was Professor Alison Dobrik, Director of William Peterson University Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Titled Education Against Genocide, a Pre-K to 12 Perspective, Professor Dobrik's presentation was focused on Holocaust education for children and the importance of having children learn about the dark chapters of history from the early age.
Why are people studying genocide, the Holocaust and other genocides in K-12 schools? There's a lot of reasons. So first of all, there are these mandates. I don't know if you remember the movie Schindler's List.
Yes.
Schindler's List, wonderful movie, right? So that was in 1993, I think. And then there was like a wave of Holocaust education mandates from that, the impact that movie made. So we have one in New Jersey from 1994. New York followed suit in 1996. And those are K-12. There has to be some form of Holocaust and genocide education. There's also, this is just in a bill form now, as some of you might know, but there is a U.S. Armenian Genocide Education Act, a bill that was passed that is moving on that will also have a really big effect on how much you see these topics in schools. So here's one of the big rationales, I think, with the rise in hate crime, which this only goes up to 2020, but in the past few years, the trend is continuing. So we hope that education around all of these, terms, race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, and so on, we hope that it will contribute to a better world. The line's going down on there. This is another really big rationale, I think, that it's not just about teaching historical facts, obviously. It's also about kind of developing your own, who are you going to be in the world, your personal actions, your values. So this concept it's called the pyramid of hate, is the idea that at the bottom of the pyramid, speaking of foundations, you just have your biased attitudes and speech, right? And some people just say, oh, that's just words, not a big deal, freedom of speech, right? But if that gets normalized, it escalates to acts of bias, discrimination, and maybe even violence and maybe even genocide. Raphael Lemkin, Polish lawyer, came up with the word genocide when he was studying both the Holocaust and the Armenian genocide. It's a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. Kids often start to understand history through literature. I love this quote that says, literature teaches us in part how to feel about the historical facts, not just the facts, but how to understand what it was like to go through. So young kids reading books like this, and you see none of them have to do with genocide. They might have to do with immigration and fitting in, ugly ducklings, Sneetches kind of story, like tolerance, getting along. Here's as they get a little older, and you'll see, so now we can get into more stories. If you haven't read that Honey Jar, right, An Armenian's Escape to Freedom, it's amazing. It, I think, just came out last year. It's a great book for upper elementary. Terrible Things is like an allegory about genocide. And then you can get to the more advanced and especially graphic novels, right, like Mouse or Year of the Rabbit, one that just came out that's also. If you want to learn more about social emotional learning, self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness, and the idea of this interactive wheel they have at that site is that all of us are responsible. The whole community, right, families, schools, classrooms, not just that one child who's being told to.
The second speaker of the event was a Professor Harold Takushian, who spoke about the importance of oral history, and specifically the significance of Armenian oral history in a context of preserving the memory of the Armenian genocide survivors.
For my brief remarks, let me note that oral history doesn't go back that far. Of course, it's ancient in its approach, but it was only in 1966 that the Oral History Association was formed here in the United States. And it really took off because there were so many overlooked groups, so many people who felt overlooked. There are two views of human history. One is the Thomas Carlyle's view that history is the story of great men writ large. When you read your history textbooks, you're reading about the leaders of the world, Alexander and Stalin and FDR, what they did. You're reading about the big guys. But the fact is, there's a second approach to history which is easily overlooked, and that's what Charles Dickens did. Thomas Carlyle wrote about the French Revolution, but Charles Dickens wrote The Tale of Two Cities, about the average people and their feelings and what happened to them. So there's that really larger level of history, namely oral history, the average people, what experiences they had. And the fact is, it's extremely suitable for Armenians because Armenians haven't had a state for so many years, and Armenians have suffered so much in the Middle East. They've gone through so much in the past 3,500 years. So Armenian oral history is very suitable. And in the late 20th century, there was a race to interview survivors of the genocide of 1915. And the fact is, the big organizations, the church, were not involved, unfortunately, but there were other organizations that were involved. And there's a beautiful list that Gerard Liberidian put together back in 2019, but a list of about 50 independent projects worldwide that have collected Armenian oral history. I'll give 3 examples here in my limited time. The first is Father Krikor Gergerian, a very heroic figure who survived the genocide and documented what happened, and the link there to his collection, which is now in Clark University. And thanks to Reverend Father Gergerian, his nephew, Edmund Gergerian, helped Ani to start the Krieger Award. The second example is Richard Hovhannissian, who passed away last year, but he is the single largest source of Armenian oral histories, and he was working with the USC Shoah Foundation. He also had the UCLA Promise Armenian Institute, over 1,000 interviews, and most of those are available to young people if they want to hear them. The third example of Armenian oral history that is available to young people is here in the East Coast at Columbia University. Vasgen Parsegian invited us back in the 1970s. He said, I want to give you a state-of-the-art tape recorder if you would just interview older people. And that's exactly what we did. His son Adrian Parsegian, after Vasgen died, said people are never going to hear these tapes. So he arranged with Columbia University to put these tapes in together. And then Miriam Kalechi at Oxford University learned about these tapes, and she's now digitizing them with text. How many of you have interviewed your parents, your father or mother, about their lives? The good news is that you should do this. Everybody who has a chance to interview their father or mother should interview them about their lives. You'll learn so much.
Author Aida Zilelian gave an emotional presentation during which she spoke about the story of her family, depicted in her latest novel, All the Ways We Live, specifically her grandfather Garabed, a genocide survivor who had to deal with the aftermath of trauma he had suffered, resulting in violence, emotional and mental instability, and the effects his struggles left on the future generations.
My grandfather Garabed was orphaned in the Armenian genocide. He ended up in France somehow. He was thrown in jail for killing a Turk when he was a teenager, and he was released and ended up in Bucharest, Romania, for much of his life living very difficult years under a communist regime. He was thrown in and out of jail because he kept giving things away in the black market or selling things. And eventually he came to Sunnyside, Queens, which is where a lot of Armenians came, and settled there with my grandmother Shake, my father Harutun, who has passed away, and my aunt Mari. And he didn't live very long. My guess is because he had lived such a hard life, and I never got to meet him. He died of a heart attack in his early 50s. My father would say, your grandfather was very strong, he was very hardworking, he was very smart, but it was everyone around that community where I heard the real stories about my grandfather and his violence, his mental instability, and that cast a shadow into my childhood growing up decades and decades later, because that's what I witnessed, violence and trauma growing up. And so I have this invisibility of nobody knowing what Armenia is or the genocide. I have these decades of violence passed down that I absorb. Several years ago, I get this phone call. No, actually it was a message on Facebook from this woman, Mari Zilelian, who was close to my father's age, and she says, I think that you and I are related. I think we're relatives. I've been looking for my long-lost Uncle Garabed for most of my life. And so we start talking, and I find out that she's from the vilayet of Zile, which is probably where my last name came from. And she says, you know, my uncle, I was told, went missing during the Armenian genocide, and his name was Garabed. And I've been looking for so long, and she connects me with her daughter, and we speak, and she says, I really think we're related, we should do a blood test. And the weeks pass, and we both send away for the blood test at the exact same time. And finally, one morning, I'm sitting in my office chair, and I see the email, and I tell myself, Aida, it doesn't matter, right? You're no better off if this was not a blood connection. And I open it up, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to fly all the way to California. I'm going to see pictures of my Zilelians, you know? And there was no match. So immediately, she gets the same results, and she calls me, and she says, I think this is nonsense. She goes, I think we're definitely related. I think this is a glitch. I want you to feel comfortable when you come to California to please visit me and my mother, which I have. And it doesn't matter, she says. And we hang up the phone, everything feels good, but it doesn't, because it does matter to me. It does matter. It bothered me a lot, right? And I carry that in me, and I know that there are many, many people in this position that I am in. And what I tell myself now is that if my grandfather hadn't survived, I wasn't going to be here today. And I take that with me in the best way that I possibly can.
Musical entertainment was provided by Lee Tambulian. Dr. Kalajian gave a wide-ranging presentation where she spoke about Meaningful World's work around the world, organization's missions and purpose, as well as the harassment and intimidation she and the organization's members have received at the UN from Turkish mission over the years of her work advocating for Armenian genocide.
So I'd like to start with Maya Angelou, who has been my mentor, God rest her soul. Her eloquent saying, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. I think this is what we're missing as humanity, because we keep saying never again after genocides, but somehow, somewhere, we continue repeating the same issue, the same problem, the same approach to difficulties. Is really greed? Is it political leaning? I'm not sure. We really need to get to the bottom of this so that we can actually say we're preventing genocides. So it's not just the genocide of Armenians. Actually, Raphael Lemkin was in his discovery of the word genocide, he referred to the long-term impact of cultural destruction of Armenians in the diaspora and in the Ottoman Empire. Our motto, one of them is one helps another, both become stronger, is how we help others as well, and we don't consider ourselves privileged. We are humbled that we're able to help 51 countries and 26 states, over 98 humanitarian missions we've done since 1989. And the other one is very important for everyone. Shared sorrow is half sorrow, while shared joy is double joy. So it is important that we share. As I was chanting during the meditation or a moment of silence, we really mourn and acknowledge and witness. The important thing is to acknowledge. A lot of victims think that they're the only ones, they're isolated, and they say, oh, why me? And they go into victim psychology. But look, it's happening everywhere. Slavery, Ottoman Turkish genocide, Nazi Holocaust, Palestinian suffering for 75 years still going, Cambodian genocide, Tutsi in Rwanda, genocide of Darfur in Sudan, and still going on in Sudan now. As a matter of fact, in June, we are outreaching to Uganda, where there are millions of Sudanese refugees in camps and Somalian refugees. So we work on 5 levels, transforming 5 levels of trauma. Individual, what you go through; collective, what we all went through with COVID and what all the Armenians are going through now, and Palestinians and Ukrainians about the violence going on in their country. The generational trauma, what we pass on to others. So traumatized people too, this is scientific, when you're oppressed over 650 years in terms of Armenians under Ottoman Empire, and the frustration is building from down because you can't even speak the language in public, but it doesn't blow up because you're still being pressed down. So the pressure is going to blow up horizontally. And who's going to be next to me? My brother and sister. And I unconsciously, I'll become like a crab pulling them down through my envy, jealousy, and putting down and not appreciating and empathizing with them. So in every single program we had from 1990 to 2019, at the UN, we had the consistent harassment from the Turkish mission because they're right across the street from the UN, as you know. So our programs are published in the UN journal. So they see the program and they come to disrupt every time with a different approach. One time they would throw a chair and then I would say, call security, and then they run out of the room. Another time, they write a curse word on our program, and which I'll show. Here is one of the programs we had where they threw the chair. And so denial is the last stage of the genocide, according Stanton, who is a genocide scholar.
At the conclusion of her presentation, Dr. Kalajian brought an example of a woman who planted the seed of a flower every year for 25 years, transforming a bare land into a valley of color and harmony.
This valley was rocky and dirty. There was no flowers at all until she made it her goal, life goal, every spring to plant flower seeds, flower bulbs. And look at this tapestry, beautiful aesthetic tapestry that just opens the heart chakra, but actually it's like rainbow colors, yellow, purple, orange, and green, all in harmony. And I like to leave you with 2 questions. Where are your seeds and flower bulbs? Where are you planting them? And how committed are you to caring for them?
As Armenians around the world commemorate 109th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, the event such as Genocide Prevention Panel at the Fordham University is more important than ever, since it is only through the education and discourse we can prevent the future genocides.